So you've decided to start your own private practice as a healthcare professional in South Africa. Congratulations. It's an exciting time ahead. And I get it. The exciting bits are the fun things like choosing a name for your practice, designing your logo, maybe a website, maybe having stationery printed, kitting out your therapy rooms. Those are all the exciting bits, not the boring stuff like legal documentations and bookkeeping, but those are fundamental foundational elements that you need to have in place in your private practice to ensure the longevity and the health of a thriving, profitable private practice. So I've asked health law expert elsabe Klink from elsabe Klink and Associates to come in and give us a presentation on what are some of the key contracts, forms, and legal documentation that you should have, that every practice should have or consider having in place in their private practice. Now, if you're new here, I'm Tasneem Abrahams. I'm the founder of the Private Practice Growth Club and the Private Practice Growth Academy. And if you like this kind of videos, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and also hit the bell notifications if you want to be notified when I post new videos. So let's go over to elsabe and hear what it is that you need to have in place in your practice.
Good day. My name is elsabe Klink from elsabe Klink and Associates. We're a consultancy that has worked in the health sector for many years and across many disciplines. And we also have pharmaceutical and medical device clients, so we understand the health sector quite well. Today, we're just going to quickly touch on forms in healthcare practices, which is really an important risk mitigating strategy that one can have. So, why forms help? So the forms help you structure your practice. So everybody knows this practice works in this particular way. And one can even make a lot of things electronic nowadays. People can, for example, complete forms prior to visiting the practice. So it's really a way of streamlining the practice. It also sets the tone of the practice. So it kind of says we're organized, we know what we're doing. And one of my pet hates is if you're in a practice and there are 20 different forms, all in 20 different forms with 15 different logos. So forms is a way in which you portray that I run a professional practice and I know my stuff. The forms also help establish responsibilities. People are very aware of their rights nowadays, but not of their responsibilities. So it's really important because it portrays to what the practice expects of the patient or client, and not only what their rights are towards you. It also communicates important rules, such as do we do claims to medical schemes or not? What is our billing policy? How do we deal with insurance reports? All of those things can be set in these forms. It also creates certainty. So both patients or clients and staff then knows this is how it works. It also importantly creates evidence. So if there is an issue or a dispute, nothing works as well as saying, "Oi, Mrs. Smith, that form that you completed, do you remember that form? Point 6 there talks about our relationship with medical schemes." So it gives you a very nice way in which to say to the person, I haven't sprung anything unexpectedly upon you. Then it's also an early warning system. So in particular, the complaints and complement systems work very well, because if you receive a complaint, you'll know if this is so serious and that the person feels so aggrieved that it could lead to something that you may have to report to your malpractice company. So whether you're with MPS or one of the others, it gives you just that early warning that you know something may be up. So these forms, one can easily, and many people take these forms, you buy a standard file from a stationery shop and it's got information on top and you think, okay, that's fine, I'm sorted. That is not necessarily the case, because apart from general business rules, so I've listed there a few: Consumer Protection Act, National Credit Act, POPI, PIA, competition law, all of those apply to the practice, but there's also a health-specific law. And if you are working in, for example, mental health, we can add to this list the Mental Health Care Act. If you deal with children, the Children's Act needs to be added there. So there's business legislation, there is health legislation, and then there's all the statutory councils. So the Health Professions Council is obviously the most important for people that's registered there, but many practices, for example, employ a nurse. Then that nurse is subject to the South African Nursing Council, or your interaction with a pharmacy is subject to the South African Pharmacy Council. So there are basically three things that needs to be considered in your practice forms. So for me, the most important forms that any practice should have is firstly your terms and conditions. So that's the small print that often are on a lot of files that you buy from stationery places, or that some people do themselves, or that their accountants or their billing companies provide them. Now, the T's and C's have become really important since the Consumer Protection Act. And you'll know that all the ads say T's and C's apply. And in your practice as well, T's and C's should apply. So that is a very important thing. It sets the general relationship between you and the customer, the client, the patient. The second important one is the patient information form. And the patient information form now is really important in terms of the POPI Act, because sometimes we collect information on that form that we actually should not be collecting under the POPI Act. So for example, marital status. The marital status is not important. What is important is if somebody is a main member on a medical scheme or a dependent. So we need to reevaluate what we ask for on these forms against the POPI Act. Then the complaints and compliments policy. We initially had the policy only being a complaints policy. And then some of our healthcare professional clients say, no, that is so negative. And that's been particular from our occupational therapy clients that came, that is really negative. Let's make it something that could also be positive. So I'm not sure, I've never asked somebody how many complaints they got and how many compliments they got through that system, but it is a really nice thing also to have a standard form. Because through that, you make sure that the person don't just dump everything and say, I kicked the dog and then the dog ate the cat and then my husband got upset and all of that. You then say to the person, what is the issue, who was involved, and what do they want? Because this what do they want is also really important because it lets you know how the person feels about that. Sometimes somebody may just want an apology. And you can really take the sting out of it by then knowing what the person wants. And then a billing policy is really important. How do you bill? Do you use a specific coding system? If you use that coding system, would all medical schemes fund it? How do you deal with bad debt? If the scheme doesn't fund something, what happens? A billing policy is also important for your staff. So everybody that deals with your accounts and the claims to medical schemes would find that really valuable. Then the next category of forms are the treatment consents. And here we must bear in mind the provisions of the Children's Act. So children under 12, children 12 to 18, and then adults. There's also permutation. So if you work in mental health, you may need forms for people who are mentally incapacitated. If you work on particular settings such as terminations of pregnancy and you consult or you counsel people there's particular provisions in that act that is relevant. But in general, there's the three categories that will depend on the type of practice that you do. And then there's also a post-intervention consent that we have realized because the law allows you to intervene in an emergency. Often people afterwards say, yeah, but I'm not paying you because I didn't agree to this. And a post-intervention consent helps manage that situation to say, we did intervene because the law compels us to intervene. And these are the rules around that intervention, including then the payment thereof. One of my medical practitioner clients says he always sends his staff down into the ward or the ICU if the patient wakes up. And if they're just very grateful that you've saved their lives, they sweep in with these forms to get the patient to actually agree to it. And that's also where they then agree to the so-called billing consent, that they'll pay for the cost of everybody involved in, for example, saving their lives. The last type of forms are all the new kind of POPI related forms. So consent to disclosure form. This is really important because it's no longer okay to just say, yes, you can talk to my HR manager about, you know, how I'm battling to adjust in the workplace and what is needed there. That's not enough. We need to only disclose what is necessary, and we need to only disclose to the person to who it's necessary. And that's why this disclosure form is so important, because then the patients say, you disclose to Tebogo in HR, to nobody else. And this is only pertaining to my workplace adjustment and not to anything else. So it's a very nice thing also to manage that and to ensure you're in line with the legislation and the ethical rules. A disclosure register is a very nice thing because then you've got it in a single place. Normally you'll file that patient's consent to disclosure in the patient's file, but you don't have an overarching record of what disclosures you've made and for what reason. Having a POPI policy and framework is important. And then the access to information manual and requester form. So all of those are about information and keeping information safe and disclosing information. Then there's other types of documents that's important, all the staff related things, employment contracts, full-time, part-time temps, fixed term, locums. The other day we reviewed something where the attorney said, but you know, you can appoint a locum forever. And we know the HPCSA says only 6 months. So it's really important also that you check that the rules not only align with labor law, but that it aligns with what the HPCSA expects of us. Workplace policies are important, grievances, disciplinary action, code of conduct, smoking in some places is a real problem. So those policies help you manage that, performance appraisal of staff and so on. And then there's other types of forms and documents. If you're in an association with other practitioners, so you share certain resources, and you may work in a multidisciplinary setting where there's a physio practice, an OT practice, and a psychology practice, for example, you can have an association agreement in terms of which you organize yourself. Administration agreements, those are very prevalent nowadays, where people set up a separate legal entity that administers one or more practices and may do billing, they may provide the human resources, they may provide reception staff. They can even in certain cases say, we negotiate with you on your behalf with medical schemes, for example. Rental agreements, all of those facility type of agreements, cooperation agreements where you say, you know, if I go on leave in December, this other practice will stand in for us, or these other practitioners will stand in for us. Supplier agreements now is a huge thing in some of the professions. So where professionals use, for example, medical devices and so on, we need to be really careful because there's now strict rules in terms of, for example, financial deals, so kickback deals and those types of things. Sponsorships and grants are always important, and there's codes there that is relevant to also make sure that the healthcare professionals' independence and their judgment is never fettered by any financial interest that they may have. So lastly, it's really important, whichever forms and documents you implement, that staff knows exactly what is what. So they must know which forms are used when, and to recommend certain things to patients. So if somebody's really upset, they must say, we have a complaints policy in a form. You're very welcome to fill it in. You don't need to leave your name. There's the complaints box, for example. Sometimes we do a sequential document that says, first the patient information form, then the T's and C's, then the this, then the that, so that it's clear to people which forms they must use in which setting. They must also know when not to accept the form. So we've had a couple of instances over the years where somebody said, I've got all the forms ready and wonderful, and now we've got a problem. And when we looked in the patient file, because remember, there's always a copy that goes to the patient, in particular of the T's and C's, and you keep a copy, okay, so that they know what they've signed. But when they then looked in the patient file, the T's and C's was never signed. So when they were then wanted to say to the patient, but you didn't let us know that your medical scheme has changed, the patient just says, ha, 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 I never signed it. So one need to avoid that. And also say to staff, and if patients scratch out things on the form, we've had a patient who, our forms have got something that's really strong in terms of saying the patient takes responsibility. And if they harass the staff, they can be refused access to the practice. And there was a guy that scratched that out. And the practice said, what must we do? And I said, but you shouldn't accept it then. You said then, because that's then the patient who you don't want. In that case, however, we could also say, but hang on, the National Health Act says we are entitled to refuse to see you if you do that. So if you harass us and our staff, we're entitled to say we are not going to service you. So the staff must know when they can accept certain changes and when they can't. So then the staff must always be able to explain the forms. So people often say, yeah, but I signed it, but I didn't understand it. So they must always invite the person to say, is there anything, do you understand the form? Can I explain anything to you? So that the person cannot afterwards say, but I didn't understand. Then staff must be supported and assisted in difficult situations. So if there is a case, we've had cases where somebody just tore up the forms and made a big scene. There needs to be a protocol whereby the staff member knows they can call a practice manager or they can call a senior person in the practice who could help them in that difficult situation. So that is then the end of my story. That is the emails of all of our professional people in our consultancy. And you're very welcome to contact us if you need any further information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, elsabe. And that was very informative. And I think most health practitioners, when they go into private practice, don't have a clue about all these forms. All they think about is the patient information form, and
yes.
you know, yeah. And so it's
and
so,
then
it's
they
so
buy
important.
These folders from Walton's, and they think they sort it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you. The reason why I especially asked you to come and speak about this topic is because I discovered on your website that you have an online shop where you actually have forms that's specifically for the healthcare professional. Yeah. Can you just talk us through that? And based on what you've just presented now, what are some of the things that people can actually purchase on your website?
Okay. Do you want, I can do a screen share and we can actually go in on the website.
Yes, sure. That'll be great.
Okay.
While you're bringing that up as well, do you also, you know, you were speaking about the staff training. I was just thinking, if I as a health professional myself don't know these things, where do I go and get that kind of training for staff and myself? Is that also a service that you provide?
Yes. Yeah. So we've just stopped during COVID. We've stopped a bit with our trainings, but we do practice staff training. We've got a specific training that takes people through the forms and the processes and all of that. We've got labor law training for everything around your staff and disciplinaries and all of that. And Yvonne is really, really good with that. She actually worked for the Department of Labor quite high up. So she understands that. We also then help, you know, if labor inspectors, we've now have during COVID, they come in and they ask the practitioner, where's your COVID plan? And everyone's, oh, what are you talking about? So she knows how the inspectors work and what they look at and so on. So, we've got, we can, and what sometimes happens, so with smaller practices, they just club together, you know, and we do one training session on a Saturday morning, or one evening for all the practices, you know, and then the cost is a lot lower. So it's, you know, there's no, and we're quite flexible in terms of how we deal with it.
So that's a great idea. So if you're just starting out and you know a few friends, you're an OT and you have a physio friend who's starting out, you can club together, have the training yourself, and then once you know the information, as your practice grows and you start bringing on staff, then you can then impart that knowledge onto them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's see if I share this. say. Good. So through the years in our business, we have developed a set of forms, templates that one could use. And those are what we have found most commonly needed by practitioners. These are just templates. So one needs to tailor make it and make sure it actually fits in with your practice. You need to put it on your own letterhead with your own fonts and give it your own flavor, and also talk about what's important in your practice. So our templates, and you'll see like here, our templates has got these yellow highlight areas, and those are normally the areas where the practitioner need to change it. So on our website, there's this health practitioners shop, an online shop, and you can tick the yellow things are all the COVID stuff that has now happened. And that I don't think will we won't be released from that for at least another year or even more, because you will always have, even if it's remote, some COVID risk in a practice. So these are all the COVID documents. And then here are our various, there you see is the patient details, child patient details, pro forma. There's a practice welcome letter. Not everybody wants it, but there's sometimes it gives a nice touch for people to say, this is our practice, this is how we do things. So we have, for example, certain specialist clients who they take a minimally invasive approach with procedures. And then they say, this is who we are. And it tells people up front that very important thing, or people who say, we take a much more broader view, a holistic view of you as a person. Or we focus on employment issues, or we focus on disability or pediatrics or whatever. So the practice welcome letter is a really nice touch to just say, this is who we are. Then you see there's PMB information. There's also a practice email disclaimer. In the POPI times now, it's really important that because we don't know who's got access to the patient's email on the other side, we need to put something there. Also, if you have a busy practice and you don't get to all your emails in a day, it's important that it says, and if you send personal information, for example, this email address also goes to a staff member. So it doesn't necessarily go to a healthcare professional. So it's a nice thing to have. PMB information is always important. Billing information, compensation fund. So there you see is the general practice forms. Then there's treatment consent templates. There's the employment ones. And right at the bottom here, there's just memos on things. So every now and again, you'll see if there's things, restraint of trade. So if I employ this person, can I prevent them, if they resign, from being employed with somebody else?
Yeah.
So
I've had that question actually a few times in the groups from people who weren't the ones wanting to have the restraint of trade in place, but who was leaving a practice and asking if this person, the employer, is allowed to say they're not allowed to practice within a certain mile radius. So there's so many things that people aren't aware of. And also I just want to draw attention as well to this, the employment ethics. I recently had Annalie from Ethics Simplified on to talk about employment ethics. She's very passionate about that because she says that, she sees it all the time, that especially the younger therapists are being taken advantage of. And sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just because of lack of knowledge on the part of the employer, that they aren't even aware, for example, with the locum rule, that they're employing people and they're calling them a locum when they're actually an employee and should be, getting all the basic conditions of employment, and they're not. So I think it's so important for our professionals, if they're going to go into private practice, or even if not, as an employee of the state or education department, you should clue yourself up on these things, so that even from that point of view what your rights are in that regard. We just get taken advantage of because we don't get to know all of these boring legal stuff that's so important.
And it is, and the moment if the pawpaw hits the fan, one of the really sad cases that we dealt with and a practitioner passed away, and her husband inherited her practice, but the husband wasn't a healthcare practitioner.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then suddenly these professionals found themselves being employed by somebody who didn't have a clue. So, and there was no malice in there and so on, but it was a really big, difficult thing to disentangle that, because the husband loved his wife so much and he was so attached to that practice that he didn't want to let it go, which was the right thing. He had to do it. Yes. But it was a really painful thing for everybody. And it then also turned out, as you say, they weren't properly employed. It wasn't really clear, were they independent contractors, were they employees, there were never pay slips issued. So, and it's so important. It takes a bit of time to put these things right, and it may cost money to do so. But in the long run, if I take the heartache that people have, if this blows up, and some things happen. Somebody passed away in that case. I mean, nobody could have predicted it. It happened. And then suddenly there's a problem. And then we had to, because there were no pay slips, no UIF was paid. And there was a whole bunch of things that then resulted from that. So my advice always is to people, try to do it right from the start. And because it will save you a lot of headache and heartache.
Yeah, I think, what I always talk about in the Private Practice Growth Club is that when you're going to go into private practice, you have to, first and foremost, before you do anything, is to reflect on why you are doing this and how much are you willing to sacrifice, because and are you willing and able to develop a business mindset? Yes. Because the problem is people go into private practice thinking they're opening a health practice, but neglecting the fact that this is a business. And when you think of it as a business, then you are open to the idea that it's going to cost money. Like, you can't expect to open a practice and not spend any money. And, so you need to have some kind of willingness to sacrifice, whether it's of your personal resources. Your family needs to be in on it. They need to have buy-in. You can't decide, okay, I'm going to start a practice, and then your husband doesn't know, and then you kind of taking out of the family savings. You have to first have that in place before you even embark on starting a practice. And having all your paperwork and all of those things in place is the first step of feeling more official about things.
Yeah.
People tend to just start up and then they spend money on like Facebook ads and to get patients in when actually the foundations aren't there yet. Yes. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and just the Facebook ads and so on, it could land you in so much trouble. So we have had so many issues just in this year. So although it hasn't been a busy year for many practices, we have had issues with Facebook ads. So it is really important that you check your wording and you check all of that, and you don't tut and you don't canvas and those things.
Yeah.
But that business mindset is really important. And thinking about, I love practices who've got their logo and they've got it sorted, and they think about which colors am I going to use and which fonts do we use? And everybody in the practice use that particular font type. If you write a report, it's neat. It just shows a professionalism that is really, really great. Your website, your IT infrastructure, and doing a website doesn't need to cost you thousands of rands. So it's that having that business mindset. You're now a small business owner.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not just practicing. I'm an owner.
I think also because the misconception from most people who are now new to the business world, or not even in the health professional, generally I find entrepreneurs, when they think of marketing, they think of advertising. And they don't realize that advertising is just a tactic in your marketing, whereas marketing is actually everything about that represents you, your culture, your personality as the face of your practice, the relationships you have with your referrers, your just everything that represents who you are and what service you provide. That is marketing. And so like the branding isn't just the logo. It's like you said, it's all of those things tied together. The consistent image that you are representing online and offline is your brand, and that forms a fundamental foundation of your marketing. So getting that business mindset kind of helps you get into that way of thinking, you know. And also, like I was just recording now a CPD talk for impact learning around how to represent yourself online as a health professional. And really the key of the talk was that if you at the outset establish who it is what it is you want to be known for and who you are as a health professional, and you focus all the messaging you put out there online around creating awareness about your profession and the topic of interest that you want to be known for, and less on like getting yourself to be known and things like that, that comes secondary. And you are then doing something that is of a service to the people you're trying to serve, which then will eliminate any risk of kind of breaking the ethical rules. Because the more, in fact, if you think about it, the traditional marketing was the whole touting, canvassing, but modern marketing is actually more about the person that you're talking to than yourself. You shouldn't actually be talking about yourself and your expertise and how great you are. You talk about, you know, these are the things you struggle with. I hear you. You know, this is the things you need to know about. And the Health Professions Council is all about promoting your profession rather than you as the professional. And if you just follow that basic rule, then you'll be fine.
And am I empowering people to make better health decisions? And if you do that, there's nothing preventing you from empowering information. And often, you know, nowadays with Dr. Google being all over the place, it's an amazing value add, and it's an amazing marketing tool to say, I've distilled, if we work on disability, for example, a workplace disability, I've got 20 articles that I've selected that will help you, the patient, in managing this. So you're spot on in terms of that. Where do I target it? And the pitch is at the client. The pitch is not about me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think this is a massive time saver. I was very excited when I saw that because, as I say, I have a lot of people ask me, oh, like what forms should I have? And it's just such a time saver. If you think, I always say, like, you know, say something costs like, say the notice of disciplinary hearing costs 790 rand. I ask people, if you think, okay, 799 isn't pocket change, but on the other hand, if you think how long is it going to take you to create the form yourself, and then you don't even know if it's correct. So what is the opportunity cost if you charge, say, 700 rand for a 1 hour session, for example? You could have been spending that 1 hour treating a patient, earning that money, rather than spending 4 hours creating a form, making sure it's correct, and then you're not even sure if it's correct. So yes, you're spending the money, but you have to think, what is the return on investment in terms of your time and the opportunity cost, and making sure that down the line you've covered your bases from a legal point of view.
Because down the line it's going to be very expensive.
Exactly.
So a practitioner the other day say, and these two people that coded incorrectly left, and afterwards said, no, we fired them, and then said, no, they left on their own. And I'm thinking, so this is where it then gets hairy, because there was no process. And that is going to be really costly, because then you'd need to, you know, if it goes to the CCMA, you'd need to get an attorney involved and all of that. So
and not only the monetary cost. I know of someone who back in the day of Groupon, back in the day of Groupon, and the rules weren't really clear around Groupon, and she's a dental practice and she ran a Groupon thing, but it wasn't her, it was the agency she'd hired, and she asked them multiple times, like, are you sure it's okay? And they said, no, it's fine, we've checked and everything's fine. And then she was reported for using the Groupon, and not only did she have to pay a big fine, but she now has forever on her record that she was had to be in front of the disciplinary hearing. And now that she wants to go overseas, she can't, because she will never get that clean, good standing certificate. It will always say on her certificate, and people don't realize that, like, there's no like period of time where it gets taken away. It's forever going to be on your certificate. So you kind of have to have all your bases covered and make sure you have the malpractice insurance and you have all the legal documentation. So
absolutely. Great.
Thank you so much, elsabe.
Thank you. It was so nice meeting you.
Yes, definitely.